Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're really excited to see so many folks here to discuss accreditation, which we don't always get big audiences of excited folks, but obviously with things happening today, and both the federal government, our state governments, and what's happening with our both institutional and specialized accreditors, I think we'll have an opportunity for a very rich conversation this afternoon. We're sorry for getting started a couple minutes late. We already started the conversation backstage and forgot to come up and share it with everybody else who's here. So. The goal today is really to look at accreditation outcomes, ROI, the future of value in higher education. And I'm really excited to be joined by, two great panelists and myself. And I do have a couple of just run a show pieces to make sure that we go over logistical items. If you have a comment, you want to connect with your peers, you can use the chat, which is available in Vimeo. If you have a question for Kelly, Ray, or I, feel free to submit that in the Q&A. We will be looking at those throughout and trying to tie them in. We have a lot of the questions that came in during the registration form, and we've kind of built a little bit of a flow around including those. And then most importantly, know this is being recorded, so there will be a recording made available, I believe, as soon as tomorrow, along with a copy of our slide deck. Our slide deck's a little on the shorter side, just because it's going to be a lot of conversation. And then really quick, we're going to do intros. I'll start with myself. I'm Will Miller. I'm the Associate Vice President for Continuous Improvement in Institutional Performance at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. We specialize in anything aviation, aerospace, engineering, and we have campuses in Daytona Beach, Florida, Prescott, Arizona, and then over 120 sites in 28 states and 8 countries. And I'll turn it to Kelly.
Hey everyone, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Kelly Rainey, I serve as the Senior Director for Student Success Initiatives at NACUBO. NACUBO is the National Association of College and University Business Officers. In that capacity, I work with institutions across the country to help with the intersection of student success and strategic finance. So this is a new conversation for many institutions. So I'm happy to be one of the key players in helping bridge that conversation. And prior to joining NACUBO, I had the opportunity of working in the institutional research, institutional effectiveness space back on a campus. So definitely accreditation is something that I'm very well familiar with in previous roles, but also in light of the conversation I do now with institutions. And today I think it's very fruitful for us to be exploring what's next. What are we looking at both from a policymaker, a institutional lens as it relates to parents and students. So I'm very excited to hear how this conversation goes forward.
And Ray.
Thank you both, Kelly and Will, for joining us today. I'm Ray. I'm relatively new to Lightcast. I'm coming from the higher ed industry. I was leading strategy and innovation at the University of Florida before this, and I've done that at a small private school as well, where I was also a dean of a business school. I have gone through accreditation at each level in terms of institutional reaffirmation, new program accreditation, new location accreditation. So I've been experiencing it throughout my career, and I'm excited to be at Lightcast now. One of the reasons we wanted to convene this conversation is that we're in a moment, and Remy, if you can take us to the next slide, I would just say higher ed is facing a bunch of pressures right now. One data point that we often point to is that currently today, 60% of open jobs do not list a college degree requirement for application. This is a trend we're seeing that could be interpreted as the private sector in some ways rejecting the premise that a degree is the path to employment. And at the same time, the topic du jour here about uncertainty about what accreditation changes are coming, as at least here in the U.S. And sorry, I'm saying that because I'm inside a huddle booth at a global conference that I'm at right now, where people are talking about some of these same issues. But in the U.S., where we face funding and regulatory uncertainty, as that I think stems from also a question about what's the value proposition of higher ed? How is higher ed helping to drive the economy forward when you think about appropriators deciding whether or not to fund that endeavor or leave that entirely to private space? And if you go to core principles, the sort of foundational notion of what accreditation is for, there are really two and a half primary purposes, as I see it. One is the question of, do institutions do what they say they're going to do? Is there are the outcomes there for students in terms of both retention and graduation and employment metrics, and satisfaction to some extent? Did people come in and get what the product that they take out loans to pay for? The half, I'd say, is if it's a research institution, are there research metrics in terms of output as well? And then on the other side, are the stewardship components in place? Is the institution, a few months from shutting its doors because it's not financially stable, and so should we allow drawdown of federal funds to recruit students to a place that may or may not be stable? But if you can convey the quality of outcomes for students and the right types of stewardship internally for an institution, then maybe what I would position it as, if you're speaking the language of skills, that is what the private sector is looking for, and the public sector is looking to fund things that align well to private sector needs, then maybe you're getting ahead of the curve of whatever the answer ultimately is in terms of accreditation. And so Lightcast works deeply in that space, and we can talk more about that later, in terms of market maker between skills demand and skills supply. And so we would position this as a pretty important language to learn if your institution is not already using it as a way of helping to shore up against some of the uncertainty in the space as it stands now. I'll flip it back to Will to take us through the next section, but thanks everybody for joining, and we're looking forward to an engaging conversation here.
Awesome, Ryan. It's a perfect segue. I mean, I already see the comments in the chat. I see Joanne's excited about the topic, and Doug's already pointing out some of the disconnect on the private sectors here. But we want to start with a poll, actually, before we get fully dove into this. And it's really looking at what your current perspective is on what's happening in terms of accreditation, both present and future. So we have a 3-point poll, and it basically asks, do you feel like the dust is going to settle soon? Not much is going to change. We're just waiting it out. Or are we seeing it as the times are changing, but the future is a little unclear? And we're going to need to think about ways to adapt, but we're not rushing. Or is it the revelation that this might be a whole new world, and we're having to seize the moment to overhaul our approach to accreditation as soon as possible? And I see that Remy put in the chat for us, use the menu bar, the right side of your screen, to respond to the poll. And then we'll have the results pop up here in a minute. And Kelly, while we wait for the results, I can tell you, I feel like I go through all 3 of these on a daily basis, where there's points of the day where I'm like, this is nothing, it's going to be fine. And there's days where I'm like, oh boy, this is all going to be completely different and completely new. And we're going to have to change some things and reframe. So I'm curious where you sort of see yourself here.
Yeah, I was thinking about my own experience, and just not only working at different institutions, but also kind of wearing the hat I wear now at an association level. And I see myself kind of, as I'm exploring conversations with institutions, how to imagine stepping people through and moving them in the direction of where do we go next. And part of just even thinking about this conversation holistically, we have so many institutions that are at different levels of this conversation, and I imagine when we look at the poll results, we're going to see that as well. But we have to keep in mind, as we move people forward in reimagining what accreditation looks like, we still have institutions that are dealing with capacity, capability, bench strength issues, every day. I mean, things are changing so often, and in so many different ways, that I think this conversation, even if you think you're stable at one point, we're going to see shifts continuously. So I think holistically, as a sector, we're going to have to prepare ourselves to be able to ebb and flow as things happen on our own individual campuses.
100%. It's the results popped up while you were saying that, and it kind of fit perfectly, where the vast majority of folks are sitting in that the times are changing, but we aren't rushing, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, at the end of the day, that's where I settle back to, because so much of this is based on an administration that could be gone in 3 years at this point, 4 years. And then what happens with the pendulum? I mean, Kelly and I talk all the time about everything's a pendulum swing in higher education. And that pendulum swings back and forth, and it's always a question of where the end point really is, what that looks like. And then as a data person, I'm always curious where the other 2% of people went. But I'm going to assume that they've just had enough of accreditation altogether and are moving on to other things to think about. So this is good for us to know on the framework side that we're at least cognizant of the fact that things aren't going to be the same. We're not completely having our heads in the sand, but maybe we're not necessarily rushing through. So knowing that, we'll kind of lay out the big goals for today, and then we'll continue the conversation without going off too far. So we obviously want to talk about accreditation and how we demonstrate value. What could accreditation look like, since the door is open to these conversations and these changes in a way that I don't think historically they necessarily have been. I mean, higher ed, we're slow to change. University of Virginia, I mean, you look at the academic calendar, it takes COVID to change the original academic calendar Jefferson's putting in place. Like, all of these things are there, and we know that. So what's a student and outcome centered system look like, maybe? What are the opportunities and risks if we tie it this way? How does labor market insight and alumni career outcomes demonstrate ROI? And then obviously we're gonna look at your questions, the ones that we haven't tried to build in. And I think really the first question I want us to talk about, and I'll share a little bit, and then Kelly, I'll pass it over, is really, how did accreditation get to this point? Historically, accreditation was created to be this sort of shield of quality. It was something that was supposed to tell us that an institution was doing the right things in the right ways. And today, instead, it's a target of, a lot of skepticism and a lot of concern. And that's both, from within the academy, outside the academy. It's, not really immune from anybody. And then, how do we figure out how to restore that trust? I even think about looking through at the institutional level, what gets schools onto the public radar. And it's, it tends to be things like finances, and it tends to be things like, board of trustees interfering in things that maybe they shouldn't be according to policy or past process. You don't necessarily see an institution ending up on an accreditation watch list because their graduation rates fall 10%, or student enrollment dips immediately, or students aren't meeting course learning outcomes. I mean, an area of near and dear to Kelly and I's heart. But what I also notice is the number of schools that are merging and closing, even the announcements in the last few years. And you go back and you start saying, so were they on a warning? Were they on a monitoring? Were they on a sanction? And you find out that for a lot of these institutions, they blipped through that. They didn't end up on kind of that public skepticism piece. So I think it's important that we recognize that a lot of this concern's coming from uncertainty around, what people want out of higher ed. It's a general discontent in higher education in general. I mean, you look at the Gallup polls over the last 10, 20 years, significant decrease. But what's really important is it's not partisan. There might be a slightly more significant decrease for individuals identifying as Republicans, but Democrats aren't necessarily making up that gap by saying higher ed's doing great. So there's so much around it, Kelly. So I'm curious for you, how have we got to this point where accreditation's in the crosshairs in a way that it's even more amplified now than it has been historically?
Yeah, and I'm going to double down on what you said, Will, because even in my experience, both working in accreditation and then assisting institutions in thinking through how to uh, comply with accreditation, I think it has become such a nature of, what do you need me to say? What do you need me to document? What do you need me to put down on paper so we can move past this? And it becomes just an act. And so often working on a campus, I would often say, let's think about this truly as an area of a continuous improvement. How are we looking at outcomes? And having that conversation continuously, as every year you were starting back over and over again, trying to have that conversation and realizing that we were living truly in, how do I prepare information to submit, and be able to check that box. And we all know that that is not the ultimate goal of accreditation. We have talked about this in so many different conferences and platforms, and we have business partners who are assisting with addressing that. But we're here now where we know things are changing. And as Karen mentioned in the chat, the future is still unclear. But how do we start actually doing some contingency around it so we don't get so behind the eight ball in responding to this? So we have associations that myself working at Nakubo and many others that are constantly looking at what can we do to prepare and help address. How can we have additional conversations on the Hill to understand what we need to bring back to our institutions to be able to address this? And thinking back to the poll itself, we know people know at this point that there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of moving parts and so many different things that are happening, that we fear this will get lost in the midst of all those moving parts. So even at an association level, we are even having those talks about what can we do to help support our institutions in this. But I will put something out to us as well to have us start even thinking for ourselves, what do we want this to start looking like? Because we still have a voice in this. We still have the opportunity to shape what does this discussion around outcomes and return on investment start to really shape, and we can inform. And I think that's really a key part, that we don't need to sit back and wait for someone to dictate certain things to us. So I think that's another part of this conversation too, Will.
May I, Will, just add, to Kelly, your point about what do we need to say and to move past this, and how do we make it something that's more about continuous improvement, and your point about we have an opportunity to shape something here. Agree with 100% of everything you just said, and that latter point I think represents a big part of the opportunity of the moment. If um, if there's a groundswell of being able to demonstrate how we as higher ed are building management tools that focus on the right things, that are outcome oriented, and that demonstrate quality, I think we do have more of that opportunity to shape what comes next, than if we are waiting to see what is handed down that we need to comply with, and then we try to massage the answer. So I think there's a first mover advantage for folks who do figure out how to create what are the right KPI dashboards. How are we using these as management tools that are living, breathing parts of how we administer our business, and then say, hey, this ought to be satisfying any accreditation regime that comes up. And if it doesn't, then probably the accreditation thing is the problem, not what we're doing is the problem. So anyway, I just strongly agree with you that there's an opportunity to seize the moment and help determine our future.
Yeah, and I can testify to what you just said, Ray. I mean, what we do at Embry-Riddle, placement's a big part of our business. We put people in as pilots and air traffic controllers and engineers, and if we're not placing into jobs, nobody's paying us to go to flight school to just become a hobby pilot. That's not what they're putting their money into. So we have to be able to see that connection. And there's lots of times where we have that conversation around, we're doing a great job. Our numbers are where they need to be. We hear from industry, they want more and more and more. If an accreditor is then coming in and saying, well, we don't like this, it's like, what's the disconnect? Like, we're showing the outcomes. So, it does tie into to kind of the fact that, as we're seeing in the chat and thinking about societally, we're in an age of rapid technological and workforce change. And it's probably cycling over more and more frequently than it has in the past. But we have to be able to think then what metrics are the ones that actually matter. We can talk about the ROI in higher education, and people like to throw around that idea of ROI in higher ed. But unfortunately, on our campus, I have 10 people sitting on the core leadership team, and they have different definitions of higher ed. The way the provost and the CFO view ROI in higher ed is not exactly the same. Everybody cares about the student success angle, but CFOs and finance folks might ask, what cost are we getting to that success, and what would be an acceptable number? And I've seen that on my campus. I've seen that consulting with other campuses in the past, where when we talk about ROI, the faculty conversation, the student conversation, the parent of the student conversation, and the board of trustee conversation, those four definitions don't always align. So Kelly, you're with Nakubo, so you look at this
Yeah.
even more on that side. What metrics do matter? What should we be looking at?
So, Will, before I answer that one, I just want to again continue to shake my head on this ROI piece. And I fear that we have overused the term ROI in so many different ways too. Um, but we have to recognize that ROI means so many different things to so many different roles on a campus. And part of the challenge that we're seeing, particularly in my space, is that we're not aligned when we're talking ROI. And what I've often done with institutions is let's back up to where we need to understand how we're defining ROI. And maybe ROI is not the right term that we should use because in some ways it turns people off because they automatically think that it's a judgment. So I think one of the things we first have to do is make sure we have a good understanding of what we're defining as that return on investment. And I go a step further when I talk to institutions. I often say return on investment for students. So what are we actually looking at as far as measurements are concerned to understand that we are truly having an impact for the students that we have made a contractual promise to when we had them come to our campus,
Right.
participate in courses to matriculate and receive a credential. And based on that promise, what is the return on investment for them? When I introduce that as a concept, then we're able to bring those different parties to the table to start defining and what metrics we're looking at around ROI. Now, I will say on behalf of my business and finance professionals, they still need to be at that table. So oftentimes I know when we're looking at student success, we may be thinking of certain components of the institution and holistically the organization. But my aim has been over the last few years, how do we get our business and finance professionals to the table to be able to be an active change agent in the conversation around student success and overall student outcomes? And that means bringing to the table also additional conversation about ROI. And for them, of course, they're looking at certain strategic calculations as we look at resource allocations, as we're looking at the way in which we are allocating different resources. We're looking at academic program prioritization. So we do have certain things from a business and finance perspective that we're talking about. But now connect the dots to the larger conversation of the additional metrics that we've highlighted in this conversation. How is that connecting to workforce demand and need? How is that looking at alumni outcomes and what we've done on the front end through our programs to connect the dots? So I think there's some larger realms of us bringing together various different metrics to have what I say is a total student experience to better understand that ROI. For me, and bringing this back to reimagining accreditation, I don't think we should do ourselves any disjustice to say that this should be very simplistic in nature. Every institution is different. We often say you learn what you know from one institution is what you know about for one institution. And so making sure that we can think broadly as to what various metrics relate to the mission, strategic priorities, and overall student success goals helps you really determine what metrics are critical. But I don't think that we will be successful in reimagining accreditation if we don't bring the business and finance into the conversation as we move forward. That is what we're looking at from a legislative standpoint. That's what we're looking at from our business corporate partners to make sure there's a holistic understanding of what ROI really means.
Great. Great point, Kelly. I just want to add in sort of also partially in response to what you said and to what Joanne said here in the chat that ROI might look different to different audiences. And getting at an institution level arms around what's the ROI in terms of financial outcomes, what's the ROI in terms of debt load and in terms of earning and in terms of job placement and in terms of satisfaction, and having a foundation that's a multifaceted view of what outcomes are, and then constituencies can be trusted to decide for themselves, oh, which is the one that's most impactful for me or that matters to me, is motivational for me. Maybe I'm not looking to make a ton of money and I'm okay carrying a student debt load for 10 years because I'm cause driven in the thing that I'm trying to do, and that's not my motivation in life, and that's okay. And I think one of the things that makes some institutions, like ones I've been a part of, uncomfortable is you go, oh, how is the market or how's the world going to judge, well, we have this debt load or we have this placement or this outcome. And really, if we're able to get good quality data, then people ought to be able to make a decision for themselves and say, well, that's not really what's driving me in this case, and so that number could be okay, even though it's different than this other number. So anyway, I just agree with you that thinking that ROI just means one financial thing might not be. It's probably one of many things that matters to people.
And I think it ties in naturally. Kelly, you mentioned some of the things like, job satisfaction, career placement, all of these different areas, economic mobility, civic impact, economic impact. We have all of these factors that to be honest, if I put it in an accreditation report, a lot of the time the accreditor says this is unnecessary. And I saw the comment in the chat about, have we broadened beyond too much of the US DOE 10 standards? I mean, if you go back and read CFR 34 and look at what it says accreditors have to do, we're well beyond what the minimum kind of expectation is. And if you're in the SAC-COC region, you know this because you do the SAC-COC standards, and the federal regulations are sort of, baked in some way, shape, or form. But I guess my question is, how do we measure things like this? If these are the outcomes that we care about, and they're the outcomes that society cares about, and parents care about, and employers care about, how do we figure out ways to do that in a more fair, consistent, actionable way? And then on the flip side of that, what's left for faculty? What's left for the folks that are in more of the traditional academic side or the traditional accreditation side? And how do we make sure that they don't perceive this, rightly or wrongly, as being a different type of over bureaucratizing? I mean, I'm having flashbacks to working at liberal arts colleges, and you can't put value on my philosophy degree, or you can't put value on but we have to figure out ways to maybe make that the case. So do you have experience there? Are you hearing things from the CFO and the finance side, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, two immediate thoughts, Will, to that question. I initially went back to some of the work that you're doing at Amarillo, and even the virtual conference and face-to-face conference that you've been hosting for a couple of years now. And to me, it comes back to we do have to do a better job of educating our own community around these conversations. And if you haven't, for those who are joining us, you haven't heard about some of the continuous improvement conversations that are happening at Emory-Riddle. Will and his team have been doing a great job of really making sure at a total across the campus opportunity of engaging the community and just really unpacking what do we mean and how can we learn from one another. I think there's so much more to do in making sure we bring awareness and education. And I'll take it a step further in thinking about our business and finance folks in this. We have to really have a different level of engagement and collaboration. I don't think we're going to be successful using the same tactics and strategies that we always have. We're going to have to start thinking differently. Many of you are having to do it right now. Um, but I think in a totality of how do we move from this dominance around compliance to really thinking through how we're able to demonstrate continuous improvement and tell our own stories. That means a different way of engaging with one another on campus, building awareness, as well as better collaboration. And our business partners, our business and finance professionals that we're working with at Nakubo, they hear this story quite a bit because we're pushing it more and more that they can no longer be seen as the naysayer or the individual who always says no to things. So with that, that means you have to be able to be at the table earlier and more active. And that also means that you have to learn more. We have to learn together in this conversation, but we also know that having to just learn the basis around what do we say when we're talking about continuous improvement? Why is it challenging sometimes to get to alumni data? Why is our various different systems for data governance and systems management so off where we're not able to really get to the key information that will help us tell our stories? And asking those key questions are going to help us be better prepared to be able to not only demonstrate our own story, but everyone can then feel like they're a part of it as well. And so, to your point, Will, bringing faculty into these conversations, not only for just building awareness, but just so that they have a level of engagement in this holistic conversation is very crucial. And I think the same thing for our business and finance professionals. This is going to be a shift for many of us. And I know if we think about that spectrum of institutions, some of them may not even be on this webinar right now, but we have so many institutions that are on this large spectrum of where data is such an area of issue and concern for them. And until we get the data piece straight, being able to see truly how we make ROI relevant is going to be truly a challenge. So, thinking about that spectrum of those who have infrastructure issues, those who are challenged with just understanding and knowing how to use data is critical. And then we have some that are very, very successful at this. You have some who have done this work for so long and have presented so many different sessions and books and resources and articles around this. I bring this back to say we're going to have to help each other in this and thinking through how we educate and support each other as we move forward as a sector. That's going to be very critical.
And I'll say, just building off of this, I think Remy got a poll question based on Susan's point up real quick for us, because this is an important part. There are questions about response rate and what the data tells us. So, we're curious, how confident are you in your ability to actually track alumni success in ROI? And again, 3 points: not confident, don't have the insight, somewhat confident, but wish it was better, very confident. You know what you need to know. And again, same thing. You'll be able to answer it on the menu on the right. And as Remy opens it up, I'll just say, I mean, for us at Riddle, I'd say I'm somewhat confident, bordering on very confident, but I'm not necessarily as confident that I'm easily getting that information in one place. If we go between industry advisory boards, our students, what we can publicly gather, we get to a pretty complete picture. But the way that we're executing that maybe isn't always the best use of resources in some ways. And I've been at other institutions where I would say I was not confident at all, and it was exactly Susan's point. I hear back from 4% of my students, and I hear from the ones who all got jobs, so it feels inflated. Or I'm looking at doctoral programs, and the student came in making $200,000 a year, and they still make $200,000 a year, but I claim that as being partially due to my program, and that's not really a great number. So, I mean, Kelly, you've worked with a lot of institutions. Any thoughts there as we wait for the poll?
Yeah, I think we are seeing that and the immediate thing as you were talking, Will, went to my head was turnover. Because part of what has been a critical piece in our conversations is that loss of knowledge. Even people who are leaving the actual sector of higher education. And many of those are taking some key knowledge with them, which moves the needle on where you think you are at a certain point. And then it kind of throws you in a whole different tailspin. So our part is kind of also watching this turnover that's happening alongside of all the changes that are also occurring right now.
And I see the results are in, and I'm not surprised because majority sitting in that not confident category. Some are in that somewhat confident category. Only a few in the very confident. And again, I think different institution types put different value on this and attempt to get to different places with it. I'm going to guess that for a lot of the somewhat confidence, or even the not confidence, there's probably particular areas where you might feel more confident than in others. I have some places where, I know we get 100% participation, and I know the numbers are accurate because of how they collect, but it definitely changes things. So I guess if we think about, the fact that we're in an era where there's more opportunity than there has been in a long time for us to have these types of conversations in a proactive way. And as you said, Kelly, be willing to ask our accreditors or share with our accreditors, here are some things we could use. And, I think we come at this from a place of partnership today. I mean, our accreditors, whether it's institutional or disciplinary specialized, they're more vulnerable than they have been in a long time. And I think they're feeling that. So we can come and help and suggest ways to do it. But maybe from the theoretical normative lens, what should be the balance? Like, where do we ultimately balance between institutional autonomy and the ability for higher ed institutions to do what they need to do to push student success and societal impact versus that public accountability piece where I think we find that line getting blurred sometimes where what should go into public comment and what's not relevant about an institution's choices or background. So I mean, what do you think about that? And I'm on the fence, admittedly. Like I see it both sides depending on the issue and
Yeah.
who's upset. If it's somebody at a random airport in Arizona who's mad that we're flying over their house at 9:30 in the morning, I think the public has too much say. And then there's other times where I'm like, man, the public should really be looking at this because what we're doing is really good or really, up in the air.
I'm with you, Will, because I've thought about this too, about what does that balance look like? Um, and I change as I think through different situations, and even talking with different institutions, and I see some who are really struggling, but are trying their best to be able to show that they really have that ROI in place. But I think there's a need there, but yet it still presents a challenge. I would love to see people pop some thoughts in the chat here on this particular question, because I don't know if there's a specific answer today. Um, I I'll give it just a couple examples, Will, as you did. I think about an institution that I worked with, that literally they were waiting for 5 years to find someone, one person, to be in their institutional research office. And their point to it was that I need to wait to put somebody in that spot so we can start doing all this work. Uh, and when I pushed on that to say, so you're telling me for the last 5 years, you haven't really been looking at any data to help you inform decisions? To their point, they didn't have the skill set. They weren't sure where to even start with that. And though that raised the hairs on the back of my neck as to, oh my goodness, how are you justifying compliance from an accreditation standpoint? I understood that they were trying their best as well. And they saw the need, they just didn't know how to get there. And so I think I see where this presents definitely a challenge for many people, but I also see, how did you get for 5 years? How did you document anything to be able to make decisions? So I think there's still some critical need there to really help to ensure there's some kind of framing around that to support those institutions that need to figure out a way to keep moving forward and to be able to justify how they're supporting students and overall student outcomes. But we also have to recognize that many institutions are struggling, and that struggle is real, as well as sometimes that struggle has to manifest in certain ways that are not the the ideal. And how do we help you move to that direction as well? So I don't know if we have a solid answer on this one, Ray. I'm excited to hear what you're going to say too on this, but I do see that we do have to have some more detailed conversation about it.
Yeah, and I think Kelly, that's the perfect time because it's why we're here with Lightcast today. Is they do have some ideas and thoughts around how to get this data in a more reliable way into the hands of folks so we can think about feeling confident. Because I think the last thing anybody wants to do is push the accreditors to do something new and not come armed with the information they could then reasonably ask about and for. So Ray, do you want to share some of that with the folks that are here today?
Sure, that sounds good. Is this yeah, so we thank you for the slide switch. So really good frame up. Thank you both. We are pretty excited, and again, I'm always self-conscious when it feels like we're being promotional, but I'll tell you the reason we're working in this lane is because we believe in it. And so I think there's a big opportunity in visualizing and demonstrating how tethered one's grads are to job success. We had a good conversation here about, well, what does ROI really mean, and maybe stepping back from that for a second to say, do we need to be defining ROI, or can we just be surfacing things that we know matter? and let people make their conclusions about, is that ROI or is it not? So I'll set aside that term for a second, but say, as we relaunch Skillify, we've had this for some time, but we relaunched it this week with a bunch of exciting updates to it. And one of them is the program to occupation alignment score. And that is saying, when we take, thank you for advancing the slide, when we take your program and learning content and we mash it up with our Lightcast labor market insights to be able to give you insight into a score that is, how aligned are those programs that you already have, and how do they tether to what's demanded in the labor market. And so what you're seeing here is example of a score of 76. That's saying you're 76% aligned. What is coming out of your institution in terms of the skills that are delivered in your programs align 3/4 of the way with what's needed in industry, and that's a strong score. I think, yeah, thanks again. And so this is just a dashboard view. One of the things that I think is also important about this is we talked about how do you define tools for yourself that allow for continuous improvement, and that is not a snapshot that happens once every 3 to 5 or 7 or 10 years on an accreditation timeline historically, but it's something that you're monitoring constantly and looking in sort of quasi real time how that shortening that feedback loop. It takes on average today 18 to 30 months to build a program that aligns with the labor market, or sorry, to design and launch a new program, excuse me. Getting constant feedback about how aligned an institution's offerings are to the labor market can hopefully help to shorten that loop, and recognize the need to evolve faster in an AI-enabled world. I'm on the edge of going too far on a tangent, but so I'll pull myself back here just to say that we're pretty excited about the ability to demonstrate connectedness as one of the offerings that could help answer some of that question about ROI. I will pull up there and flip it back to you, I think, Will.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think with what you're sharing there, right? And one of the first comments that came in, I agree with, is, this always gets to where it's difficult. The idea of, how's this work for the liberal arts? How's this work for the fine arts? These areas that are tougher to track, zip codes, all of those data points are there. And I think it's, again, conversations that in higher ed broadly, we haven't had time to fully go through the depth and detail necessary to get to a place that we feel good about it, because we're too busy doing things like, also came up in the chat, like filling out all of these accreditation reports. And as Kelly mentioned earlier, aggregating this data, collecting this data, looking at what is culturally treated on most campuses as an episodic event. We have ABET and Abby going through with July report states. And I had an associate dean this morning who said, well, once we get through July, we don't have to worry about this for 5 years. And I'm like, no, that's the problem. We put this stuff off, but we put it off because it's not bringing us meaning in a continuous way. So why invest time into something that's not fun, that, doesn't get me the return? So we have to have those types of conversations. So, I mean, Kelly, I guess I'll just throw this question to you to start. I think I've shared kind of my view, but what principles should guide any type of reinvention of accreditation so that it can remain mission driven, which we've seen in the chat and in the conversation, but also bring in this outcomes focus in an impactful way that would hopefully, going back to Ray's rock in a hard place, help us get some of the pressure from the general public off because they're seeing the value.
Yeah, I think this is again the point of, not only do we have to have a better sense of what, when when we're talking about our planning, and we're talking about the metrics that are tied to our planning, we have to be more deliberate in making sure that we're not creating documents that are just for shelves and for submitting to an accrediting body. They have to be truly guiding our direction as how we operate and how we're supporting our students. And that's collective effort. That needs more engagement with various different parties across the institution to be more deliberate in knowing what metrics really mean. But I'm gonna back up for a minute because I know we talked about this, and Ray, you did a good job of making sure to emphasize the value of this conversation. Is that we have to stop making the assumption that individuals who work at our institutions all have the same understanding around metrics, accreditation, and just overall assessment. Um, we make assumptions that people know how to do this work, and it's not fair to them. It's not fair to assume that they automatically know what metric is going to work for what type of way of knowing if something is successful, if it's we able to demonstrate achievement. I think we have to do a better job as institutions ensuring that we provide that level of understanding, guidance, and continuous development of our colleagues, and that's being more intentional in the effort. It is, and I'm not going to say that's easy to do because that has to be a very deliberate process with individuals with that skill set on our campuses. But if that is the case, that we know we need to do a better job of doing that, how are we collectively ensuring that people have those skill sets? How are we assessing that in by them coming in the door? How are we assessing that when we promote people into different roles on campus? And how are we assessing that as things change, such as accreditation, as we're trying to reimagine what that can look like? And taking that a step further, as we're even working with various different metrics when we have defined them, how are we ensuring that people understand how to digest that information? What do I do with it now that you have informed me of it? And how do I even know how to act upon it to make sure that I'm helping to support our students in our individual programs, in our individual support services? And once again, even as it come up in the chat, how are we talking with our business partners, our board members, and additional stakeholders, additional funders that are supporting our work, to know that we are making this level, this trajectory of continuous improvement, but we also are able to tell our story that shows ultimately how our students are not only meeting the outcomes that we have determined, but also the outcomes that holistically really shape the picture of that higher education is showing this value. And I think that's a larger piece of this conversation as well, is that being able to demonstrate value is starting to look a little different than just what, and Will, you said this earlier, than what Thomas Jefferson initially acknowledged as the value of higher education. And so I think it's critical that we do a better job of also talking about not only what this value looks like, but what also, as we talk about in Nakubo, more is possible, and being able to tell that story with our metrics and our various different ways of unpacking that information is going to be more helpful in making the case as to not only what we are doing has merit, but it also is truly showing what many of our colleagues are talking about in the new age of compliance. Ray, I'll see if you want to add anything to that as
Oh, I'm
well.
sorry. I apologize if you were waiting for me. Excuse me.
Oh no, it's
I,
okay. It's
you know,
okay.
I don't want to be too boring, but I agree with agree with you, and would say that I think rather than, I mean, one of the things that I think was more part of the robust conversation was what does it mean to demonstrate ROI? And I would just sort of step back from that. And instead of trying to solve the thing that's hard, maybe look for where, where can we agree? Where do we find starting points that we know should be part of the answer? And I think one of those sort of low hanging fruit pieces is part of the answer probably should be, are our students able to find gainful employment, and are our degrees doing a good job of preparing people for that? And so that's one of the starting points that Lightcast is focused on now, and that Skillaby helps enable, is answering that question. And I'm just as a longtime higher ed strategy guy, I think being able to start with what's readily available and then layer onto that and add onto that and add onto that is better than trying sometimes to answer the whole question at once. And so if there are folks, I think, as part of this poll who would like to learn more about the way that we're answering that question of how connected we are, please let us know either via the poll or the chat, and we will be delighted to reach out to you to demonstrate the ways that we're doing that work. And very grateful for everyone's participation in helping us think about the bigger question and other elements of places where we could build onto that in time.
Yes, that poll will open up. Like, so we're not going to share the results on that, obviously, but we should be good to go. I had a nice little speech I gave to myself because I forgot to unmute a minute ago when Kelly was waiting for Ray. So it was a wonderful. I wish I could have recorded it for you all. I was over here just.
You said it perfectly then.
Yeah. But I do have I saw the question that Jana put in the chat that I'm really excited about, again, from the academic side of the house. And Kelly, I think this will be one will draw some interest for you too. And it comes down to, where does that learning piece, where do learning outcomes, where does assessment fit in to this type of ROI conversation? And I'll say from my end, a lot of it is this does put pressure back on faculty. And if we're going to put it on faculty to better track student learning in the classrooms as it relates to programs, we need to figure out, from a bureaucratic administrative side, what do we take away from faculty to give them the time to do that? We can't just keep piling on to faculty. There's 100% effort you can give. And when my faculty say they're giving 300% effort, that doesn't align. So, I mean, Kelly, where do you see it fitting potentially?
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Will, too. I think that pie isn't getting any bigger when it comes to time and effort. That pie is still the same size. And we do have to also remember that if we're going to spend more time and effort in this space and helping to shape this conversation, and realizing that we need to help do more around the training and development of not only understanding it but using it, we have to take something away, or we are going to have to organize ourselves differently around this. But I'll say the same thing for our business and finance folks. And I think not only should they own more of this conversation holistically, but they also have to have a better picture in knowing how to present the overall financial success and sustainability of the work that is happening at our institutions. If they don't have it, like I was talking with one of our chief business officers the other day, and they made the point of saying that I'm always looking at the top. I'm looking holistically at what is happening at the institution. I don't look down. That is not in my purview to understand what's happening within the various different components of that. But you're now saying I need to have a better understanding of what's happening at a disaggregated level. And I said yes, because how are you able to really help shape the conversations with your colleagues, your faculty, your deans, your department chairs, your student success professionals, if you don't understand the nuances that are happening at various different sectors? How is something impacting the direction of X program in comparison to Y? And it's challenging to only look at the view holistically, but I know that's different. That's a different effort for our business and finance professionals. But how can they be active in this change and culture shift if they don't have that level of understanding? So something also has to be a give and take on their part as well. And it could look totally different for how we operate, how we're structured. And in many cases, it's needed for certain institutions. The way we have been structured in higher education has been decades in the making, centuries in the making. Does that work today?
And if it doesn't, what are we willing to do to try to make it work today, which is even more complicated to figure out in some cases. And Ray, I saw there was a question about NASEM data. If you'd like to touch on that really quick.
Sure, sure. Just really quickly, I know we're at time, so I'll just keep it short. But Karen, thanks for the question. There are several tools in thinking about how alumni outcomes are measured. And at Lightcast, we have surveys like Embark, which gets to the first destination. Where do students go upon graduation? NACM, the acronym, is more checking in on where are they at 5 years, where are they at 10 years. We have alumni pathways, which helps us look at where do all the students end up, and how do we compare that to what's happening in terms of national averages. If you wanted to be able to say, oh well, our students who go through our engineering degree earn 40% more 5 years after graduation than the national average. So we have those insights as well. The Skillaby helps us talk sort of at the program level about what is happening with our programs and how aligned to the labor market are they. The surveys are helping then answer the question of what actually was the outcome that happened for our alumni. We can go into more depth. We'd be happy to, if that's something you're interested in learning more about, we'd be happy to reach out to you. If you can drop contact information with us, or we probably have it through your registration for this. But we can give you some more walk through of what all the various solutions are and how they articulate together to get a pretty good picture of what's happening on the outside of our education.
So yeah, so I know we're right coming up to 3. Obviously, I've really appreciated everybody being here in this conversation. I always am enthused as we get to talk about these things. I hope everybody uses this opportunity with what's happening in higher education to recognize that, sort of wherever we fall on what side of the aisle, there are doors open and conversations available to us that weren't maybe 3 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So it's important that we at least have those conversations. Lightcast will be releasing a playbook of sorts, looking at some of the accreditation changes and, big picture, what could a re-envision model look like, and we're aiming to get that out in the near future before things change too much. But we'll have to continually update it, knowing that. So. Ray, I don't know, Kelly, Ray, do you guys have anything as a final close, or are we ready to give folks? Well, we're giving nobody any time back today, but that's okay. We're at least leaving on time.
No, I just
I just
appreciate
want to
everyone
thank both of
joining.
you.
And thank you, Ray, too, for giving us the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and thanks
thank you
everyone
all.
in the chat for the lively conversation. Really great for the engagement.
And I'll drop my email address in the chat in case anybody wants to connect offline. I'm always happy to do that. And we appreciate all of you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Will. Thanks, Kelly.
Yep.
Thank you.